Without any particular order, I'm first going to deal with the questions that have come in via the sign up, and then I will deal with the Q&A questions if I can do it that way. No particular order. I'm just going to read out the question and then provide the answer as best I can. So, we are arriving December 14th and staying with friends as we begin our rental search. We are looking at Porto and at Coimbra, near the old part of town. We have 3 cats. How to find pet-friendly places. Right, so there is no hard and fast rule for this in terms of finding them. The same approach applies, which is please use the general approach first, the idealistas, the OLXs, and so on, okay? Also, since you're staying with friends, ask your friends ahead of time to please go and look in their local community on the assumption that you might be wishing to stay close to these friends, which I assume are in Porto, in Coimbra. Ask them to look locally and talk to the local cafes. Look for any small advertisements that may be adverts that may be up in sort of local cafes or things like that. Those are the best generic methods to use. Try to, via some of the sites such as Idealista, OLX, and so on, try to, make contact with the agencies or the renters and ask your friends to be in touch locally, not to do necessarily a visit because that will be redundant. You'll be doing 2 visits, their visit and your visit, but at least to try and check out and see whether that property and the area is a match. And the other thing that I would say is if you want to drill down by area, you might want to talk to someone like us about doing this questionnaire. I didn't mention this, but if anyone wants to get that questionnaire sent to them, just email me. We will send you the questionnaire and we were happy to do a first analysis so that you can guide your friends or you can guide your search to make sure that they would be more or less in the areas that would be of interest. And because we use criteria such as architectural, the architectural style of the building, the location and services, budget, will overlay all these things so you can do some of this preparation in advance. Okay, so but there's no magic with that. Using the same sites, some of those that I've mentioned, that's the approach. In terms of the pet-friendly bits, please make sure that you mention up front the fact that you have the pets. And I'll tell you why. By law in Portugal, one theoretically cannot negate or deny access to a property, but common sense will prevail. If you don't tell a landlord that you have pets and they are, let's say, renting to you furnished, and they think that you're going to the cat, for example, may scratch the furniture. If you've gone down the road of agreeing a contract with the tenant and then you declare something later on, what they will do is they will say, well, the clause on the contract was completely wrong. We need a big security deposit. And because you have 3 cats, you didn't tell us you have 3 cats. And then they will be so frustrated that they will say, the contract we want now is we want a 10,000 security deposit for so they will completely block your access to the apartment anyway in practical terms. So openness, we find, is absolutely important, because if somebody doesn't accept pets, move on to somebody that does and avoid the stress. Next question: how to ensure the owner will legally register the lease in a timely manner? Well, I think I've actually answered this in my presentation. This again is a question posed by lots of people who are asking in a sense, to sort of controlling the owner. And I understand why, but it's the owner's responsibility. So if this is a visa requirement, then you need to engage with the owner to make sure that they do this, but be aware of the fact that there is a cost involved and the owner may wish you to cover that cost. It's linked also to the question about what happens if my visa is denied. Well, you can't expect the owner to fully accept responsibility for a process that has nothing to do with them. Equally, it would be unfair for you to have to pay a year's rent if your visa was denied, although very few D7 visas are denied, we should say that. So it becomes preoccupying when people are too worried about the denial of a visa, for the simple reason that I don't know many people who have been denied a visa. So the immediate reaction from owners who are in the know is, why is this person so worried about the denial of a visa? Does that mean they actually can't afford to rent my apartment because they will fail in the financial criteria of the visa application? So we always try to think of both sides of the equation, when we look at these situations. Right. Next question. We will be moving with a 9-year-old German Shepherd dog. Are there any specific clauses we must include in the lease for pets? Most listings we are looking at don't mention if pets are allowed. How common is renting property to those with pets? Any particular region with something that is more acceptable? Thank you. Right. Accepting pets or not has nothing to do with region. It has to do with owners, and sometimes with condominiums. Okay. Be aware that a German Shepherd, an Alsatian, is a large dog. It is also a breed that is considered, I don't think it's considered a dangerous breed, but it's certainly not, the obvious choice of a docile breed. Now, you could say that the Alsatian, is very tame, and it's a very, but, it's like, it is not as tame as a poodle, let's say. So the truth of the matter is, those specifics are important, but it's great that you brought it up. What I would say is, if you're looking for an apartment, there's going to be an issue because the dog is large, the dog will need exercise, the dog will run around, the big dog needs a space, not necessarily always an ideal fit for an apartment. And when an Alsatian barks, it's a deep bark. And the walls and buildings can be quite thin, and so people will be saying, well, do we want a big Alsatian? Not because of them, but because they don't want troubles with the neighbors, and because there can be complaints, and then the police are called, and then whatever. So be aware of the fact that with a larger dog, it seems more appropriate, and only you will know your dog. And I'm not sure even if the person who asked the question is listening, but on the assumption that they are, only you will know your dog. But be aware of the fact that there are certain types of properties that are more appropriate for a dog. A villa, semi-detached property with a garden, that sort of thing. So please mention that. And as regards to specific clauses, that's not up to you to decide. That's up to the landlord to decide. The landlord will take a view as to what sort of additional safety deposit or security deposit will be required, and will probably also design it or include a clause that if your dog proves to be the cause of a problem, they will have the legal right to kick you out. Okay, they will have the legal right to terminate the contract, because precisely for those situations where someone says, I have a lovely dog, it's a small pooch, whatever. I'm saying it's your case because you've declared it's an Alsatian, but then they pitch up with a Great Dane, and that barks all the time, and they have to have the security. Sometimes we even ask for photographs of the dogs so that we can check with owners. And some owners like dogs, others only like cats. There's no use explaining it. An owner is a landlord. They can take whatever decision they like. For the avoidance of stress, declare it, and the owner will define the contract clauses. How can we judge veracity of estate agents when shopping remotely? I always say, how can we judge the veracity of clients when receiving inquiries remotely? It's not a single answer for everything. You will need to build a trust. Okay. The one obvious question is one obvious answer, is don't do it remotely. Make sure that you come over locally and not only meet the people, because so many of these visits and conversations are happening remotely because of the circumstances in which we live at the moment, but take the time to come over. In terms of vetting people at a distance, let me tell you some of the things that don't work. You see a lot of people on the net saying, oh, you've got to have a registered agent for a rental. Rubbish. Airbnb is not a registered agent. It's an amalgam of owners with licensed properties, and even in some cases exceptions, because you can put in an Airbnb field saying that you do a long-term rental and therefore you don't license for short-term rentals. And no one's theoretically licensed there. It's an amalgam site. The same thing with Idealista. It's an amalgamation of different people, agents, owners, whatever. How do you tell if an agent, if an owner is real or not? Fictitious. You don't know. So the vetting of this via some sort of status, sort of real estate agent status, is not going to lead anywhere. You should be focused rather on two things. The first is the consistency of information about a particular property. So the information coming back once you inquire is the same as was advertised, the locations, the photos, the angles, the furnished versus unfurnished, whatever. So consistency through your conversation is very, very important. Factor number one. Factor number two, the person on the other side, and I'm not even saying the speed of the response, but the quality of the response, because so many people are busy that some people are taking very long to respond, and they just can't help it. They just can't deal with the volume. We're finding this all over. In some of our businesses, we're finding this as well. We're struggling. We're having to apologize. Every email goes out with sorry about the delay. It's starting to become a bit boring. So it's not about the delay. It's about the fact that people get back to you with a specific answer, objective, contextual, informative, that sort of thing. So you can get a sense that there's a willingness to help. That's really, really important. And then the third and almost most important thing is contract negotiation, professionalism of contracts. Okay, the contracts have to protect both sides. Don't expect to pull one over the landlord, but don't expect the landlord, or don't accept that the landlord has all the rights and asking for aggressive payment terms or whatever. That is unfair. The contract, which is the bit of paper that will best define the relationship between you and the person, is actually your best point of validation and vetting. Almost everything that's gone before is irrelevant if the contract doesn't protect both sides properly. And at that stage, I would say you can either go with a company that you can see works in this market, or you can actually get a lawyer there are lawyers that will provide services for validation and vetting of contracts, checking that they're balanced. But a lot of people talk about vetting the owner, vetting the real estate agent. I say vet the contract. Vet the contract. Right. Obviously, it's got to be for the right type of property. You can't have the right contract with the wrong property. Right. We have a small house trained, here we go, designer dog that we will be moving with. It seems that PT has a different relationship with dogs. Often as a home guard dog, left outdoors much of the time. Our pup is part of the family, living indoors with us. We want to rent a furnished house, flat our first year. How easy or difficult will it be to find? First thing I'd like to clarify, there's a question of perception. Dogs everywhere, and we've lived in many countries and had dogs. They're almost always part of the family. Okay, it is true that, and it's not only in Portugal. I've lived in Brazil, I've lived in Cape Verde, I've lived in other countries. I've lived in South Africa, where the dog is a guard dog because there's a security issue. It is not that the dog is not part of the family. People love their pets, and they're often part of the family. It's really important to notice this, is that circumstantially, you may be in a situation where you can actually be indoors with your dog or your cat or your pet. Cats are different because they're more independent, the whole day. But if people work and they have a dog and they have children that love their dog, the children are at school and the parents are at work, it's sometimes cruel to leave a dog, if they're of a certain type and they don't get out, locked up indoors. And because people don't always live, you could argue, why do they have a dog if they don't have much outside space? That's another debate. But if they do, they give them access to the outside, or sometimes they're left outside in a garden. Now, better to be left outside in a garden barking than left inside in a house barking, is what I would say, because at least the dog is free. They have a kennel and so on. So I think the first thing is the question of perception. We do not know, just as people do not know your circumstances, we do not know the circumstances of the landlord. So avoid making assumptions, and generalizations is a good starting point. Having said that, there are within the pet available options, and there will be some properties that accept pets and some don't. There are many that accept pets being indoors. Okay, no issue. You'll tell them they will be indoors, and they will just place a higher sort of security deposit, and you will underwrite a contract that says if your dog or your cat, what do you call it, destroys or scratches or something, you will have to pay for it. So it's a financial consideration. So there will be no, as long as you find somebody willing to take a pet, the fact that the pet stays indoors may happen once in a while, but it's not a big criteria. Right. Timing on when to look for a rental during the D7 process. Great question. I didn't talk about that, and I should have. Timing is everything, as it's often the case in life. For a D7 process, there are two timings that are important. The one is the timing which you look for a rental. So that should be around, ideally, and not everything's ideal, almost coincidentally with the timing of your application. Why? Because a rental for a D7, on the assumption that it's an annual rental, will normally ideally start about 2 to 3 months after your visa application date, because that's the time that the consulates have, around 60 days, to actually get the visa process. So ideally, you want to get the rental negotiated as close as possible to your application date. Mainly because you're going to be asking the owner, in an ideal scenario, the landlord, to not charge you the 2 or 3 months and sort of have a future starting date. The problem is that that's hugely stressful, and it may or may not work. So you've got two options here. Oh, actually, you've got more. One is to start about a month to 6 weeks before the visa application date of your handing in the visa at the consulate, and that's because inventory changes all the time. And therefore, you don't want to do too far in advance. And in certain markets like Greater Lisbon and Porto, you cannot do. It's no use looking in December for an April start. People will not even want to bother. The real professionals will not even want to bother engaging with you, because inventory moves so quickly that you're looking at decision time frames in sort of weeks or weeks at most, and therefore not in months. So they want, that thing will be rented and the stock will be different. So there will also be a regional aspect to this in terms of the timing. But generally speaking, 4 to 6 weeks before the date of your application, even if the date is further ahead. Okay? And then there's the second thing is, will the rental start? And if ideally you wanted to start in 2 to 3 months' time, in some cases, you may have to accept an earlier start if you find your ideal property, because the landlord will not want to see 2 or 3 empty months. And there is a way of protecting contractually against, let's say, the denial of a D7 visa. We've had many contracts like that in the past, which shares the risk. It gives some comfort to the landlord, and it also and creates some financial obligation on your part as a tenant, but it will not lock you in forever and ever, because there's a get out clause if the visa, for example, is not is denied. There can even be a clause for a delay, where we have a kind of a rolling mechanism in terms of creating a contract with a rolling mechanism of payment, and that, offline, again, if there's somebody in a specific situation for that, the people on our team or whatever can certainly help with that. Right. Rules regarding lease termination, particularly if one wishes to move about the country before buying, and how does one get around the 2-year utility contracts when moving? Well, there are two questions there. The first is lease termination as standard, and I think you will have seen my view around. I am not a fan of people asking for a year lease and wanting to leave after 2. The legislation states a minimum amount, but the reason I'm not in favor of that is because it unfairly distorts the lease in favor of the tenant against the landlord, just as I'm not necessarily in favor of the consulates asking for an annual lease where one is not required, but I can't do anything about that, unfortunately. So in terms of the lease termination, there is a standard termination clause in most contracts, which is typically around a third of the time, but caveat emptor. Do not expect that clause to be in the contract if you decide, or if you're looking for a summer start date, okay? Because otherwise, the landlord looks at a tenant as a potential, they're just wanting to get a cheap summer rental and then go somewhere else for for start in the winter. So if you want favorable termination clauses, then make sure that your start date of a contract coincides with a sensible start date. And by that I mean in places like the Silver Coast and in the Algarve, for example, after the summer, October, late September, October. For families, for example, we know that families want to get their family over, before the start of the school term. We heavily advise against it in terms of financial exposure. We recommend, especially because you're planning in advance, that you accept that the integration will be done at the same time. You're not going to have a month or two of sort of summer holiday in some places, and start in September, which is more or less at the start of the school term, as it were. But it means that you can plan in advance, because there will be owners who will be ready to start a new rental contract after the summer holiday, especially those who are renting by the week in the summer and then are willing to be convinced to take an annual rental after the summer, after the next summer. Okay, the 2-year utility contracts, that is not correct. There is not a two-year utility contract. A utility contract, you may be confusing that with many 2-year what do you call them, telecoms contracts like MAU and Vodafone and whatever, but even those don't have to be 2 years. If you pay more up front, they can be 1 year. It's a question of cost. What you can't get is a cheap 1 year telecoms contract. The utilities have nothing to do with that. The utilities, depending on how they run, you just change the name of the utilities into your name as a tenant. But there are many owners who will actually not do that, and they won't do that for practical reasons. It's quite bureaucratic to change utilities and counters. And what they will do is you pay the utilities as per the contract, and they will just send you the bill, and then you just reimburse them the cost of the bill. So that's the sorry, I was going to wait for the next question, but I've just realized that I'm the one. Let's ask myself the next question. Can winter or 6-month rental be found near public transportation to reduce the need for a car? Yes, very easily. Looking more for an investment property, fine, be in touch with us and we'll send you the criteria and then see whether we can help. I'm sure, or if not, one of our partners. We weren't sure if we'll be buying anything and will rent for several years, if not longer. If that disqualifies me from attending, of course not. I understand. If I'm able to attend, no, sorry, this was sorry. You can see I haven't read the questions in advance. Anyway, that was just a logistics question. So I hope the person, because I did send them the invitation, so I hope they attended. I'm under contract to purchase new construction condo in Lagos, but it won't be ready until the end of 2023. I'm contemplating starting D7 process prior to that, which would mean renting. I'd like info on finding rentals and also mortgage info. I can attend. Okay, right. Thank you, Luis. Pleasure. So the rentals, same process which we've covered. The mortgage info, no problem whatsoever. We work with several, in terms of mortgages, for those looking to buy, we take a slightly different approach. Most mortgages are through banks in Portugal. We frankly don't have the time or patience, if I'm very frank, to go around with each bank. So we have built relationships with what we call mortgage advisors. These are people that have a lot of history and relationships in Portugal with all the banks. We'd be happy to, as one of those things, we'd be happy to make introductions to one of those mortgage brokers, as we call them, and they would scour the market for the best deals. Just a point on the off-plan purchase. You can't in Portugal get financing for off-plan build. You can certainly finance the last stage payment on completion. So if you want to negotiate with the developer to balloon payment that as much as possible, that's a good way to go. The other thing that I would say is that sometimes, but Portuguese banks don't like that much, if you, for example, have made 60% worth of stage payments and you got 40% balloon payment at the end as the final payment on completion, you may be able to get a Portuguese bank to refinance and do a kind of an equity release out of some of your stage payments. but don't count on it. The bank doesn't like to give back money which they know you've already put it into a deal. So that's just in terms of the rentals. Usual process: start as much as possible in advance, especially for the D7, because it's not the question of availability; it's the question of the requirement for the consulate. They will ask you in many countries for an annual let. I can't remember now the nationality of the person asking the question, but for example, in America, as an example, 1 year is the prevailing. In the UK, the consulate is still accepting the 6 months. We've heard, so that may be an advantage, but of course it will depend on where you are actually resident, because you have to apply from your place of residence. Right. Being unable to obtain a bank loan to buy property because of our age. Is there another alternative? Well, I don't know the age of the person asking the question, but the ability to get a bank mortgage is influenced by age, in part because it's linked to the life insurance policy, which is required after in parallel with the what do you call it, with the mortgage. So 65 is a critical age, and 75 is an absolutely critical age. If you're younger than 65, pretty much an open market. Between 65 and 75, limited options and time limited. And most mortgages, if you apply between 65 and 75 or whatever age, they will typically never exceed around 80 years, 85 in some cases. But you have to get the application in time. We have had the client we had recently. They actually asked for a kind of a residual loan. It was only 25% loan to value, and they were already in their 70s, and their bank actually gave them a sort of a 5-6 year loan at very reasonable rates, and the husband was the applicant and the wife was the guarantor. Sorry, the other way around. Apologies. The wife was younger, so the wife was the applicant, and the husband was the guarantor, and that worked very well. So it will depend. But those are the critical ages, 65 and 75. Next question. Looking to buy an apartment to use during winter and rent during summer. What are the legalities of buying in Portugal if you do not plan to live there? No restrictions whatsoever. There are many, many thousands, tens of thousands of people that own real estate in Portugal. And I should say this is the case in many other countries. You have certain countries with limitations, such as Thailand and so on. But in Portugal, absolutely free to buy. Free to do with as you please, within the law, of course, with your property. You have to legalize your property for short-term rentals. You have to pay tax on the rentals at a lower rate than the long-term rates, as I've explained. And there are plenty of management companies that do this, and you can use the property in the winter if you wish and rent in the summer. No limitation to that whatsoever. One caveat: you can't buy in certain areas of Lisbon because of the limitations on tourist licensing. So there are a few exceptions because of licensing laws, but other than that, free. It is likely a difficult question to answer specifically. Forgive me. I'm just going to read quickly through and try to summarize. It's a long question. Right. This is about COVID state and how we can guess how COVID may continue to impact us. A good question. So, they don't know much about the Omicron variant. I know even less, of course, because if no one can orientate me, I'm not a medical professional, so I don't know. And I'm not going to speculate on all that. All I can tell you is that Portugal has implemented a requirement for all travelers coming into Portugal to do a test. I believe, but I could be wrong on this, so please don't quote me. I believe it may be PCR or lateral flow, okay? And if you are a resident or national and you choose not to have that done beforehand, you will be forced to do one on arrival at your cost, okay? So first requirement is you must test now before entering Portugal. No exceptions to this, as far as I'm aware. I'm not sure how long it will last. They will review this periodically. Locally, mask wearing in all public spaces, in transportation or whatever, continues to be the rule. And in fact, I believe that outside spaces as well, or some outside wearing, I'm not sure exactly now which outside spaces totally. It's a very recent change. This also has an effect, obviously, on certain things like a discovery tour. be aware of the fact that although these tours can happen, the type of vehicles used or even the type of approach done in discovery tours and people touring around may change. Not only because the legislation may require more distancing, but also people may just be feeling a little bit more uncomfortable from people coming from aboard and then interacting with them, and then being exposed to other people. So be aware, I think, and this goes both ways. We are very conscious and aware of these sensitivities and sensibilities of people in these difficult times, and we are, everyone, and so we're not talking about a business or anything, individuals are being cautious about how they interact with other individuals. Okay, but generally speaking, that's the state of play. Portugal has a very high percentage of people vaccinated, 90%. The booster program has started. We know many people who've had the boosters. That doesn't answer the question about whether the boosters will deal with the new variant or not, but that escapes and is beyond our scope of influence. So as far as what people are doing on the ground, the majority are very compliant. It's a very rule-based society, and people tend to follow the rules generally. Okay. What I would say, I add one point to that, and that is that if you are a permanent resident, I would say that in comparison to some Anglo-Saxonic countries where the principle of freedom and liberty is debated at greater length, and people don't like an intrusion into those. The Portugal is not like that. People are quite passive in their approach, and that means that in terms of risk management, the perception of risk and the real risk, generally speaking, is probably lower in a country like Portugal than many sort of countries of origin from which you may be visiting or traveling. And so what I would say to that is, if yours is a permanent move, then you shouldn't let this cyclical nature of the virus affect you, because we're all going to have to live with this for a very long time wherever we are. And so you're actually in many instances moving to a country that, with its good points and its failures, actually has has managed the COVID thing quite well. What should I do before leaving the UK? How long once in Portugal? Do I need to wait before crystallizing an investment, capital gains, keeping out of clause of HMRC? How many days can I visit in the UK? Right. So it's a bit of a confused question. This, apologies, this person may need to write to me. But before leaving the UK, if you're wanting to be resident in Portugal, you need to go through something like a D7 application, on the assumption that you don't want to do a golden visa. You can buy an investment property whenever you want. If it's linked to a golden visa, you've got to buy it before you apply for the residency. You've got to prove that you've bought it. And as far as the UK legislation is concerned, even though I'm not an expert in that, but I do know something about that, if you're resident in Portugal, you typically would want to remain below 90 days in the UK on a regular basis. And also there will be a number of ties that you have to the UK, such as a residential home, family, children, a wife, if you, for example, estranged and not moving together or whatever. So you need to take advice on this, both on the Portuguese side and on the English side. Right. Where to find long-term rentals, tricks and tips to finding the right place to buy. Well, I would say this, of course, but I think I'm just repeating the same thing. In terms of the rentals, I think I've explained the methodology. In terms of buying, next week we will be having more of a focus on the buying bit. But as a hint to that, we are, not only because we are as well, and I have an interest in a property finding business, but we believe firmly in the property finder model. Okay, in particular, if you're coming from abroad, in a country like the US or Canada, where there is a multiple listing service, an MLS, you do not find that in most European countries, which means that the listing agents represent sellers. And no matter how much they will sort of punt that's not the case, and they can act independently, and in good faith they often will, but the principle of independence is not properly defended in that model. And so you're seeing an increasing number of businesses springing up as finders representing the buyer, and then it's a question of picking the right model. And I am a big fan of property finders, especially if the business model is linked to success. There is literally no downside, there may be in some cases, each property finder is different, but literally no downside. So I encourage you to get in touch because whether with ourselves or you can see by the name on the that I've written you from propertyfinderportugal.com, there are other property finders in the market. I hugely recommend a property finder approach for people who are looking from a distance and don't know the market well. What provisions? In fact, even if they know the market well, and even if you are in a rental and looking to buy, I know a lot of people use the rental and they're talking to all the local agents, whatever. That's great, but again, you're having to tackle a lot of that process yourself. If you have limited time, then using a property finder is absolutely a good way of going about it, because it means that the you're not locked in to having to manage all this process. And a good property finder will find everything that all the agents have and more. This is a good property finder will do that. What provisions do you make if COVID-19 affects our visit? What if we reach that point? So I'm assuming this is a question relating to, let's say, reimbursement or stays or whatever. COVID will not affect a long-term stay. Okay, so please, a resident, if you get a residency using a D7 visa, for example, and you are approved, you are entitled to move to Portugal as a resident. You cannot stop a resident from moving to the country. Therefore, there is no cancellation, I would expect, terms typically, because you are moving to reside, and therefore you can freely move into the country, even if you have to quarantine or whatever. That's a separate thing, but you can move. If you're looking at a short-term stay, that's different, and that will depend. Some people will give you a refund if you can come up with a COVID reason. Other people will not give you a refund, or they won't give you a refund within a certain period of time. And other people will not even take your booking, because they say, well, why are you looking for a booking now, knowing that and then asking me for a cancellation policy when we don't know what's going to happen in the world with the next strain of COVID. So if you're doing a short-term booking of Christmas and you expect the landlord to sort of offer a cancellation policy, well, don't book it, because no one knows what happens, and there's no use expecting the landlord to accept the risk. So I think those are the three types of categories that we normally find. When looking for a one-year rental from afar, hire a lawyer and or agent. Well, one, never hire a lawyer, not to find a rental. This is not the role of a lawyer. It's number one, it's expensive, and it's not appropriate, in the sense that, they should be focusing on vetting the contract that ensues from the rental and not finding the role. There's a conflict of, each person doing their sort of task. An agent, yes, if the agent's helpful, find the agent. There are finder agents for rentals. You could have you may have an agent that has a property portfolio to sell, but also do some rentals. But what I would say is, there are very few agents, depending on where you are, but there are very few agents that will find rentals everywhere. Just on a freelance basis. If you want a full search, you should be ready to commit some form of exclusivity to some agent, whether that's a real tangible thing, such as a contract, the payment of a deposit. Also, I don't know, the people work in different ways, but if you want the best responses or the best response from an agent, is to interview some of these people, get a sense of what they're able to do for you, and then pick one and have them work for you, and with you, and give them a chance of winning the business, and they will do best by you. So if you find an agent, as per the question, an agent typically implies some form of exclusivity. If you're looking for a rental and looking everywhere, expect people's responses to be time limited. They'll give you some time with properties that they have, but they won't invest much time in searching beyond their portfolio, because you're literally looking everywhere, and that's just, it's just a business. Just a business decision. Do you expect the market to settle down, less frantic and lower priced properties in the Algarve after December when the golden visa ends? No, and I'll explain why. How do we get the structure of a building checked once we find a house or villa? Building surveys do exist. Right, well, we've had 3 in the last month alone, so they do exist. So First question, golden visa. We don't expect prices to drop in the Algarve specifically because of golden visa, and the reason being that there are very few golden visas in the Algarve. They're mainly in Lisbon and Porto. So that's a short answer. The second one is surveyor. Again, we make introductions to different surveyors depending on the degree of technical precision. And some of them use equipment to actually check the underlying structure and so on. You will expect to pay between 300 and 1,000. I do sometimes place the caveat emptor that some people will use foreign qualifications to try to differentiate themselves, saying that I am so whatever approved. It's a foreign qualification that does not typically apply in the local market because the insurance that comes and is associated with that membership does not apply. So I think it's a bit of, shall we say, slightly misleading marketing in that sense to use that, if all the benefits of using a person like that and then in no way questions that person's expertise. There's still, the expertise is still there, but the attributes associated with the let's say the membership of a professional body in a foreign country are not there to the same degree in a local market. And I find that unfair because it differentiates against local people who are actually in many instances more offering more protection given the fact that they are regulated by some sort of local body. So again, simple answer is we'll make introductions, and although it's not common to do a survey, there are people who do this, who undertake this. Right, I think we're about 45. I'm going to answer one or two more questions, and then the others I'm maybe going to create a document and post the answers, or you can email if you need some additional information. Let me just pick some additional questions here that might be linked to this particular. I'm actually going to go, if I may, I'm going to go on to the questions that were put on the Q&A. Best medium-sized cities to live in for a 60-plus single woman looking for a studio, one bed to rent while looking for something to buy. Well, the bigger the city, the bigger the more cosmopolitan they are, is what I would say. And therefore, it will depend a lot on the budget. This was by Becky. Becky, if you send us I don't know which Becky it is, but if you send us an email, the easiest way is to send you the list of the 18 questions. We will do that initial analysis, and then we'll get you a sense of where you should be looking. Anonymous attendee, wow. How feasible is it to get a rental if you have 3 dogs and 1 cat? Looking mainly at Central Algarve area. I would say not easy is the short answer. And what I would also say is looking inland is probably going to be a little bit easier than closer to the coast. But it is not going to be easy with 3 dogs and 1 cat. I will not hide that from you at all. Are deposits held in a secure government-approved account system as they are in the UK? No, they are not. They are not. And I happen to know the UK system quite well, and I don't agree with that either, to be fair, because getting a deposit back from some of these large agencies is like pulling blood, squeezing blood from a stone. So they typically are held by the landlord. Sometimes they can be held by a lawyer, but that's not common because it's additional cost. And what I would say is that I've heard stories both ways. Sometimes where the deposit is held on and not returned by the landlord, and the reasons are not sufficient. And also sometimes where the deposit is just insufficient for the amount of damage that has been done by a tenant. And then, in both situations, one has to go to court. I mean, there is no, and the Portuguese system is slow. Okay, there is for the landlord. Recently, there is a process of faster evictions for obvious non-compliance with the contract, but the legal system, as it is in many countries, I mean, even the small claims court in the UK, for example, can be quick, but if the claim is more than about 5,000, then you have to do something quicker, so something else, so that's slow. So the short answer to your question is they are not held in a secure account. They go to the landlord, and we would recommend negotiating reasonable deposits to make sure that it's fair for both sides. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it is now quite far along from what we initially intended, but I hope that the presentation and the answers to the questions have been helpful, not only to the original questioner, poser of the question, but also more broadly. Thank you one and all once again for your questions, for interacting. Always great to be able to answer questions. And one final request, and that is, if there's anything that you feel that we've missed, then please email us a suggestion, because we'll update the presentation for the next one. There was one around the timing that I clearly missed and I should have, and so I will do that. All right? Thank you very much. All stay safe, and we will look to speak to you, or some, or none, very soon. Thank you. Stay safe. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.